Question: is it possible that DEI doesn't work because we've been going about it in a really unintelligent and counterproductive way? I say yes. Hi, I'm Tori. I help businesses and community organizations create and implement anti-racist DEI strategies that actually work. As you probably know, DEI strategies have been lambasted as ineffective, but I disagree. Let me explain why. Sure, DEI trainings are largely ineffective for making men in the workplace less racist and sexist. But assuming for a moment that men aren't the only people in the workplace that count as people, data also shows that diversity and inclusion is good for everybody and has a really significant payoff. So much so that even guys who are adamantly opposed to diversity and inclusion materially benefit from having an inclusive workplace. Really quickly, diversity, your business or school or organization looks like the community around you. I don't think it's reasonable to say in a place like Portland that every business should be 20% Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native, when Portland is just not that diverse. I don't think that diversity is supposed to be magic. I don't think that it's supposed to be witchcraft. Who's in the broader community where you find yourself? And if wherever you are doesn't look like what's outside, like, you got some work to do. Inclusion is the step beyond diversity, where people in a space feel like their experiences and words and contributions actually matter to the well-being of the organization, the business, the school, etc. So why do I think that DEI training actually works? Let's look at some data. For starters, we know for a fact that diversity and inclusion leads to all kinds of culture company-wide benefits. According to GreatPlaceToWork.com, some of these benefits include higher revenue growth, greater readiness to innovate, kind of important these days, increased ability to recruit a diverse talent pool, and 5.4 times higher employee retention. That's not nothing. The article goes on to say, inclusion in the workplace is one of the most important keys to retention. So yeah, diversity and inclusion is actually good for your bottom line, which means it's good even for the people who are actively opposed to it. But let's be clear, I am very over the just give people training. Like, I'm sure that it feels great to check off a box and be like, we did the thing and we covered our asses and now nobody can sue us because we did the training. Training provides helpful information, absolutely. But putting information out there is not enough to create change. I think that we know this. As an example, literally all of us know that we need to be eating more veggies. People have been telling us this since before we could talk, probably. But for most Americans, knowledge alone has not increased the amount of veggies that we eat. So when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, we need to be looking at implementation, not just checking off training. So when we're looking at implementing diversity and inclusion, we need to look at it through the lens of effectively creating behavior change in a group of people. And we know that telling people go do a thing doesn't usually work, especially for populations that are actively resistant. Giving commands is not going to create lasting, effective change. Let's be honest, Americans are really opposed to doing things just because they're told to, even when it's good for them. Making people feel like you're taking their autonomy or agency can seriously backfire. And on top of this, HR typically only has punitive tools to use, so there's no carrots, there's only sticks. This is not a motivating structure under any circumstances, and it's not a motivating structure when you're trying to create an inclusive environment or culture. The good news, there's a lot of data on improving the behavior of groups of people. So let's discuss some of the more common concepts for altering behavior and therefore outcomes, and a couple of my own thoughts. So Jonna Berger wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review called How to Persuade People to Change Their Behavior. The article is actually about masking, but the science that he's using is solid and applicable in all kinds of situations. The first point that he makes is point out the gap. This is what he says. You can increase people's sense of freedom and control by pointing out a disconnect between their thoughts and actions, or between what they recommend for others versus what they do themselves. Let's be honest, most people think of themselves as not racist and not sexist. This is great. Let's work with people's existing beliefs about themselves. Awesome. None of us are racist or sexist. This is amazing. That means our business looks like everybody outside of it. It probably doesn't. We know the biases that adversely impact inclusion and diversity, like for example, just being able to see someone's name on a resume. We make a lot of assumptions and discriminate, and that's just true across the board. That's what human brains do. So if we take somebody's stated value as just like the truth and apply it to what's actually going on in the community, in the organization, that's a really great way to add another perspective and another layer to the outcomes that we want by pointing out to people that, hey, you already believe this, right? You already aren't a racist. So why are we not hiring people of color? You're already not sexist. So like women should be promoted at the same rates, along with pointing out these gaps in people's thoughts and actions. Another thing that is kind of essential to any change is like creating measurable, actionable goals. Don't be racist isn't a goal. Like maybe it's a dream, but there's nothing actionable about that. You're just telling me a thing not to do. There has to be a context. There has to be an outcome that we're actually actively pursuing. And business is all about pursuing outcomes. Organizations are all about creating change. Like this isn't difficult or even different from what's already happening in the world around us. We just need to take advantage of it. On top of having measurable, actionable goals, it's also really important to have realistic goals and expectations. Pretty much all of us know that we're not great at implementing huge change on a dime. A YouGov.com poll last February found that only 22% of respondents actually claim to be sticking to their New Year's resolutions like 6 weeks into the new year. Those aren't great odds. And then if you add on top of that, there's this cultural expectation that we've just sort of internalized about beating ourselves up when we don't like make our goals. We're probably not setting ourselves up for success when we have unrealistic goals that are just not things that can happen in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. Throwing people in a bunch of DEI trainings and being like, okay, things are going to be different now isn't realistic. You can't do that and expect changes to stick. We have to really be intentional about making our changes incremental. I've done this. I wake up and I'm like, today's the day I'm gonna start running again. And I go out and I run 5 miles. And guess what? I'm not running another mile for at least 3 weeks because I'm going to be so sore, I will not be able to move. I go out and I think I'm a superstar and I forget that there are actually reasons that you have to build back up to whatever mileage it was that you were running before. Huge goals, huge dreams, they feel great and they can be a really great source of inspiration. But when it comes to actually putting things into practice, having smaller goals that are more incremental that you can build on is going to be way more effective over the long term in creating change, as opposed to some huge ambiguous goal that we don't really know how to get to. So like I said, we have all of this information on how to change people's behavior, how to improve the way that people interact in spaces, how to incentivize people to make choices that actually benefit them even when they don't want to, right? Like if we can get people to stop smoking, I think we can get people to stop being racist and sexist in their decision making and hiring. I think that's realistic. I will in the future be making more videos on this particular topic because there is a lot more data and a lot more science that we can use and apply to DEI and anti-racism training to create the outcomes that we want. If this video was helpful or if you have questions, leave a comment, like or subscribe, whatever you do. See you next time.